So, Michael, we don't do a ton of preview coverage here at Polygon, do we?
That's true. And something we have started to do somewhat recently is the concept of a pre-review, where we're...
What is a pre-review? Explain this to me. I was confused when it was brought up in meetings. We do them all the time now. So what is a pre-review?
I mean, it's kind of the concept that, maybe a few weeks or a month in advance of a game's final release, we get to spend a considerable amount of time with it. In the case of, Resident Evil 7, which was released recently, Phil got to go play that game for 4 hours or something like that. Or he got a build that he played for 4 hours, and he wrote extensive preview impressions. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, this game is just a few weeks or a month away. Here's where it stands right now. It may not have gone gold. It may not be final, but just to give you an updated, close-to-release impression of what the game is shaping up like, here's a couple hundred words on it. And that's kind of where we were with Horizon Zero Dawn. I went to go play the game at an LA studio for about 4 hours. Started at the beginning of the game, played through the tutorial, the setup, and then jumped into a mission that's about 7 chapters into the game, from what Sony said. So, I feel like I got a pretty decent impression of what the game is going to be. But obviously there's still a review forthcoming. We're still waiting on review code for Horizon, which is hopefully going to be here soon.
I do want to find out your impressions on the game. Of course, Horizon Zero Dawn was announced at E3 2015. It wasn't really on anybody's radar. We knew that Guerrilla Games was doing something after the Killzone series, but we didn't expect this. What is Horizon Zero Dawn, Michael?
So Horizon Zero Dawn is basically one of those big open-world action-adventure games that have become very popular over the past decade. It's kind of in the vein of Rockstar Games' Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption title, or, say, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Watch Dogs from Ubisoft. These kind of like big open-world adventures filled with quests, filled with things to collect and upgrade and people to interact with, and then hopefully a large overarching narrative that's going to be threaded throughout all these other stories that you play through over the course of the game. So, not to be too reductive, but Guerrilla Games has effectively made a very good Ubisoft game. And I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. Ubisoft has been working and perfecting that formula over the course of multiple franchises and multiple games, and Guerrilla Games, who are best known for making Killzone shooters, they were like, you know what? We'll make one of those too, and it seems like they've done a very capable job of doing that. So if you're into those kinds of games and stuff like The Witcher or Skyrim, because this has a kind of primitive, almost, medieval bent to it, then you're probably going to be into this. This is a PlayStation 4 exclusive, and if you want a big, tasty, open-world action-adventure with lots of story, lots of dialogue, lots of things to see, Horizon might be your cup of tea.
Well, tell me about this world, though. That's really what's captivated people, I feel, since it was announced back in 2015. What is the world of Horizon Zero Dawn all about? Catch me up on this thing.
Okay, so it's described as a post-apocalyptic event game. So, maybe 1,000 years ago, something happened to our world to effectively send it back to the Stone Age. Humanity was effectively wiped out. All of our cities and infrastructure has been destroyed. But obviously there were survivors. And since then, they've come back as a society. They're still kind of a somewhat primitive hunter-gatherer culture. But in the wake of humanity's near extinction, a new species has arisen, and they are called machines in the game. And these are essentially robots that kind of mimic or are easily compared to a lot of creatures in our real world. And that includes things like dinosaurs, panthers, gazelles, horses. So there's fantastic-looking creatures that I think have drawn a lot of comparisons to the toys Zords. But they're beautifully designed robots that act like wildlife. And yes, there is wildlife in the world. You can hunt for boars and turkeys, and I'm not sure what else, but it's that humanity has survived along with a lot of other wildlife. But it is these machines that kind of threaten humanity in its current state. And the culture of Earth now has adapted to fight and survive against this mechanical threat. You play as Aloy. She is her origins are somewhat mysterious. She is an outcast. We don't know why. She is also an orphan. We don't know who her parents are. Her care has been entrusted to another outcast who goes by the name of Roast. Over the course of the game, I think what we're meant to uncover is the history of Aloy and her relationship to the larger tribe, who are legally restricted from speaking with her or interacting with her, and also what happens to humanity and where these machines come from. The first few hours of the game that I played are kind of an extended tutorial, but it's also a really strong setup for the world and the characters. And I think if you're not hooked within the first 90 minutes, you're probably not going to be into it. But there's I was pretty interested in seeing where this story goes. In terms of the relationships and the overall world building, I think Guerrilla has set up a very interesting universe in which to play in. And it also happens to be very pretty. They've done a very good job of kind of meshing this world of nature and futuristic technology. It's a really nice looking, neat game with a very solid premise.
Fascinating. You run this risk, I feel, as a developer when you go with a natural setting, right? It could just be anywhere. It's a grassy field. It's a rocky canyon. I think perhaps some of the early levels in a game like Titanfall 2 suffered from some of that. But what has Guerrilla Games done to really make the landscape different and outstanding in this game? Because the screenshots in your article, which I'll link to in the show notes here, are just stunning.
Well, I think they've done a very good job of making the world just completely filled out with flora and fauna. Everything's just nicely brightly lit. There's unlike Killzone, which is, you probably remember, up until Shadowfall, kind of a grim, dark, grimy, oppressive feel to it. Whereas in this game, there's a lot of color. The game seems to always take place at like sunrise or sunset or during a beautiful moonlit night. People have these interesting tribal costumes that are made up of animal hides and handmade fabrics, but also pieces of metal and technology that are ripped out of these machines that you fight against. So I think that all the characters have a very distinct look to them. The world is also just kind of, it's a little bit hyper real in that, I don't think they're being too slavish to, kind of nature as it's designed, kind of like, here's the caricature version or the super stylized version of nature as we like to see it, just bursting with flowers and bright colors and, streams and rivers and beautiful mountain beds, and so I think that they've really stylized this world so that it just looks fantastic, and they've also kind of peppered it with ancient civilization ruins, which would be our modern day. So you'll see dilapidated buildings, you'll see bombed out cars and rusted infrastructure. And so it just kind of, it feels grounded, but also serene and bucolic. It's a really nice looking game throughout. And then, I think also the design of the monsters helps spice up this world too. So you see these creatures that basically have headlights for eyes, and they're causing all this gorgeous lens flare effect on the screen. And it's just a really nice looking game. Everything about it just looks spectacular.
Nice. Well, it seemed like a couple of years ago, like every other game that was coming out let you shoot a bow and arrow. That was like a thing
Sure.
for a while.
Yep.
And that was something that jumped out to everybody when this game was announced.
Yeah.
But so tell me more about the weapons and Aloy and the powers that she's able to have, because I really have not kept up on this game at all, other than that initial trailer.
Okay, so I've spent some time with some of the weapons in the game, and it does seem like the bow and arrow is a big focus for her in terms of combat. She has that from the get-go. She has kind of standard arrows, but I went on a mission and learned how to craft fire arrows. And then I went on another mission and purchased a device called the rope caster, which essentially puts down a cable on the ground that has an electric shock running through it, and that can stun enemies. There's also a thing called, I think, the tie rope, which is essentially like a land-based harpoon weapon. And these are all in service of kind of like hunting wildlife. So she's kind of like a one-woman hunting party. But she's got the bow and arrow. She's also got a spear that she can use for close quarters combat and kind of stealth kills. But we've seen some other things too. She's got a slingshot where she can fire incendiary rounds. And then I saw that in the skill tree there are previews of some like heavy weapons. So I saw her essentially walking around with a large grenade launcher cannon. So it seems like there's a lot to explore there. I feel like they're kind of keeping some of this stuff a little under wraps, so as not to spoil too much. But the bow and arrow based combat is a big part of it. And she also, she has an extensive skill tree, and there's a screenshot of the skill tree in the preview article that I wrote up. But a lot of her skills that can be added are things like kind of slowing down time when she's jumping, or one-hit kills when she's jumping down on an enemy from a ledge, or the ability to heal faster, or perform more powerful critical strikes. But yeah, I think that a lot of this is bow and arrow based combat, a lot of quick dodging, but also studying your enemies. She has this little device that looks not unlike a little Bluetooth headset that lets her scan her environment, and it lets her scan creatures for their elemental weaknesses, for which components on their body might be vulnerable to attack. It also will kind of illustrate their walking pathway on the game world. So if you need to sneak up on something, you can scan an enemy, and then you can see where it's going to go, and then you can sneak up behind it. So there's a lot to the combat here, and I feel like we really barely scratched the surface of it in our kind of 4-hour preview of it. And I think that's going to be one of the more interesting components to kind of dive into once we get our hands on the final game.
Well, it's coming to PlayStation 4. It's an exclusive to that platform, like you said, coming on February 28th, so just a little over a month away. So take me a little bit further, though, into the transition of this project. You're going to hand this off to the final reviewer. What are some of the things that you're going to make them aware of, and some of the unanswered questions you've got before that review is final at the end of February?
Well, I think that's kind of up to the reviewer. I think in some cases we try and keep those reviews and previews somewhat separate. We'll see. I mean, we're still waiting on code. We haven't really had much discussion around how we're going to handle the review. Phil and Arthur, those guys are pros. They know what they're doing. So I think that they've both multiple people on staff have actually DM'd me in side conversations to say, hey, how is Horizon? Is it any good? And the thing that I've been saying to them is like, hey, if you like this kind of like this, having a menu full of quests and upgrades and modifications and things to collect and study and enjoy filling out these worlds and exploring huge maps, then I think you're really going to love this game. And I know that some people are really excited about that. You know, Sumit Sarkar and Phil Kohler both DM'd me, and that was kind of the spiel that I gave them, and they both sounded pretty amped up after my description. So, you know, I think, you know, I don't do a ton of reviews. I think we're going to leave this in the hands of people who are a little more well-versed in these open-world adventure games. And I guess we'll just see how it turns out in a couple weeks.
Last question for you. I know that last year you had the pleasure of interviewing Hideo Kojima. This game runs on this Decima engine that Death Stranding is going to run on. So tell me about your experience with that.
Well, I'll tell you, this is a very nice-looking game. I would say that, you know, based on what I've seen, Kojima and company probably made the right call. You know, this is a game that I think can present a ton of different ecosystems accurately, visually, but also is useful for the kind of, you know, mech-based stuff that Kojima and Yoji Shinkawa love to put in their Metal Gear games and Zone of the Enders. You know, this is a very nice looking, very well running engine. You know, you look at some of the footage of this game, you're getting huge draw distances. You know, you're getting a very stable frame rate. You're getting some beautiful lighting. I got to mess around with the photo mode in this game, which is available anytime you pause it. And man, you can just see the craft that went into designing the lighting and the shaders, and all the foliage just looks amazing. Just like hiding and walking through these like blades of grass and flowers, everything just looks so spectacular. And there are a couple things that, you know, maybe could look a little bit better, but this is a big open world game, and you know, I think Guerrilla Games has pretty much nailed it. I think that Death Stranding is probably going to be in good hands here.
Be sure to hit the hunting grounds if you want to train.